Good evening, guys, and welcome to the July episode of our live Q&A. I'm Mark Simpson. I'm joined by Ross Keel and Terry Wright tonight. Uh, if you have any questions whatsoever, now is the time to, it's not only us. We don't profess to have the authority of all things, all encompassing classic car knowledge. This is kind of a bit of an exchange. We're going to give you our ideas. If you've got, if somebody asks a question and you know the answer, or you got some insight you want to share, feel free to join in on the chat roll down below here. Also, below that even is an opportunity to download a free video, basically instructional on setting your gap and dwell. Anything that's free is worth saving up for. So,
one of those stock cars.
Exactly.
Who's got that?
That's
old school stuff.
But okay, now in the chat roll box down below here, after you got your free video download, or you can save that and download it after go ahead and ask your questions down below here. Also, if you got a comment or, maybe you want to share some information or your insights on a given answer, we're more than happy. We don't be offended. We're never offended if somebody else has even a different point of view, having been in this long enough that, it's the phrase bench racing is sort of invented for car guys to get together and, stand around the bench and talk about better ways to make something faster. And you'll rarely find all car guys ever agree on just about anything, even whether it's to keep your car 100% stock or to add modern conveniences and safety features to your car.
Who would do that?
All right.
All right, with that, guys, let's get started. We're going to start out right up with Richard Brown. He got his question in plenty early today. Richard, he writes, I have a 1964 Thunderbird hardtop. The weather stripping was shot on the doors and the trunk. I ordered new stripping from the Bird's Nest. The trunk went relatively well with no issues. The driver's side door, however, is really hard to close now and has a gap of about 1/4 inch. Is this normal? Will it eventually align again? I'm fairly sure I installed it correctly as the ends of the strip matched up and they should, and the roof channels all snapped into place. Any thoughts on this? I have a few thoughts, but I'm going to let their pro body guy start this one off. He's restored.
Ross, take it away. I have a thought on that. If you want to wreck some really nice gaps on doors, put new weather strips on. That'll keep them.
Yep.
Yeah, I ran into the same thing. And I think even if they were factory ones that were nice and soft, you can still have an issue. Yeah, they seem to be a little beefier and sturdier and take a little longer to compress. So I find that they do eventually compress, but you feel like you got to slam your door excessively hard to get them to close. But I was the same thing. My doors were misaligned after I put my new weather strips on. Without them, beautiful, right? I don't know. That seems to be like a natural phenomenon for replacement weather strips, and whether or not, I think it's just a matter of time.
I would think they, So
I think they will. But
the trunk's a little easier because it latches, and but window hitting against a weather strip is a little different.
Yeah.
Now, do they have frames on a 64?
It is a hard top,
so it's just the glass is hitting against it.
Well, I imagine it's probably just the door itself. I would guess, kind of like even when we did the weather strip in the trunk of your Chevelle, it was like we finished that, and it was a bugger. You were slamming that trunk lid like a dozen times before you got it to hit.
Yep.
And then, after it sat closed and out in the sun a few times, and now it closes pretty much like it always did.
That was
And I've had in my own personal experience, I've had the same problem, where I've got everything lined up and everything's perfect, and and of course the last thing you do once you repaint and get your car all together and everything else is throw the weather stripping in, and you throw the weather stripping in, now suddenly none of your doors fit and they don't want to close right, and now the striker plates and everything that you had just perfect and your perfect alignments and gaps suddenly thrown off. And usually, I have always found just leaving it outside on hot summer days. I know us guys like to, throw them in the garage and leave them all like covered up and hidden until a show day, but I find just leaving it outside on a hot day tends to start to soften that stuff up. It starts to get everything to fit, and eventually, in a few months.
I would say it was more like a year. Because the next summer it was fine.
Yeah. But it is. It's not uncommon. I know some pro shops when they do the initial build, a lot of times they'll even adjust gaps and stuff with weather stripping in place. But these are the shops that are going to like double bill you for weather stripping, and they're going to install it before they paint the car and make sure all their gaps and everything are set, and then they tear it all out and redo it again. Most of us, aren't building cars of that quality that you need to double install weather stripping and stuff like that. If you're building a $300,000 car, maybe you want to make the investment because it's what's expected of it. But for most of us, if you just close everything up and let it sit out inside, or just leaving it closed up and in your garage, will eventually, everything eventually sets, and in my experience.
I've taken that and I've adjusted the striker in a little bit further than what it needs to be, just to compress it further, to kind of set it in place a little bit, and then bring it back up.
That's a good idea.
But, it's going to take a lot of time to do that too.
Yeah.
But, it's an option. If it's a painted striker, you may not want to be loosening it up and moving it around, but I don't know. But yeah, I think it will eventually be easier because, mine were a bear too, but they seem to close pretty good now.
Yep, and that's usually the case. Is the guys after about a year, everybody's like, "Oh yeah, now it closes fine." It's like, And I suppose the seal manufacturers are following. The new rubbers and stuff are probably a little more firmer. Maybe they seal better, whatever. I don't know why it's such an issue on everything. Rarely do I run into a case where the seal fits like new as soon as you replace it. Okay, moving down the list. David writes, hello, love your show. Trying to find someone that knows upholstery really well to upholster my 1932 Ford 3-window in the Colorado area. And I'm gonna, it's like one of these questions that I get regularly is like, oh, who do you know that can restore my car in, Buffalo, New York area? And it's like, we would love to know who the best shop is in every city, every town, and across North America and Europe and Australia and anywhere else. But we can't. That'd be an impossible task. And, sometimes good shops can go bad, and bad shops can, clean up their image, and things can change with a shop,
People retire.
And people retire. Suddenly it has a new owner. The new owner either does a better job or a worse job, or, any number of things. And the best place I usually recommend to start is, find people with cars like yours and find out where they had yours done. People with, 32 Ford, if it's a bone stock, You know, unfortunately, companies like LeBaron Bonney that used to make beautiful, you know, perfect, you know, interiors, is they no longer exist. They've shuttered their doors. They didn't survive, you know, through the pandemic and everything else. But and just the sheer number of, you know, early Fords that are getting stock upholstery anymore probably decreased dramatically. But I would find somebody, either talk to people, go to the car shows, or go visit a cruise night, a car show, anything where you can run into cars like yours. Find ones with nice upholstery. Ask them where they had it done, if they can recommend somebody in the area that has a good reputation. And don't just take one person's word for it. Try to, once you find a couple, two, three people, you know, do your little due diligence and try to find more work that they've done, and, you know, find out about their experiences as far as expenses and getting stuff done on time. Some shops do beautiful, gorgeous work, but then turn around and it takes you 18 months to get your car back, and that's just not acceptable. So do your due diligence. Make sure that you know exactly the reputation the shop has, and you know what to expect. And get a good solid, estimate up front. Most upholstery shops can tell you up front, give you a good ballpark price of what you're going to spend. And if they can't give you that, if they're just going to tell you time and labor, unless, then, maybe it's time to look for another shop. Just because on a basic reupholster and a 32 Ford coupe, it's not a mystery. They know what it takes to do it. It shouldn't be a gray area at all. So you should probably nail them down on price, get a good idea of the quality to expect. Colorado's got a lot of great builders, and I don't think you'll have any trouble finding someone. It's just finding the right one for your car, because there's some shops that are more built into doing customs and street rods and hot rod stuff, and some shops that will cater more to the restoration quality stuff. So find the right shop, and and I always say, do it. I know there'll be people that argue with me. I like to do it local, just because you can go over and you can check on the progress of your car. You can, talk to the owners and make sure that everything's progressing. If there are any issues, it's easy for you to resolve them. I know some people will argue that, you can, some high end cars, yeah, they'll send them all over the country to get different kinds of work done. But I think, for most of us, shopping local is the best solution. All right. John Glazer writes, when installing a bigger cam in my big block GM car, what should my ignition timing profile look like for optimal idle and performance? Um, yeah, we've gone round and round on this.
Yeah, I mean, you almost have to have, what kind of ignition you have, or what are you using? Is it an MSD or recurve or points, or doesn't really say, right? I mean,
what should my ignition timing profile look like? And yeah, I imagine he's going to, depending on his distributor, what the curve should be as far as the reaching full.
As far as your
Yeah,
full advance or
yep. And to me, it's like there's enough variables, and it's for big blocks, they're usually going to build their power slower anyways than like a small block that's going to ramp out faster. I usually, on the big blocks, I usually recommend going with a slower timing curve, so it doesn't build it until you get, up there. but I know some guys that like to run it with quicker timing. So I think it depends on your particular setup, and it's the kind of thing you can change. If you're running like an MSD or one of the carbs where you just swap out the springs to change the curve, or some where they have the adjustable weights on the arm. you know, try to get a good, middle of the road baseline and then test it either way. It's like anything. It's like seat of the pants and a little bit, if you're on dyno, if you got a dyno, you can also test it there, see how your car responds. And if it responds to, more timing earlier on, or if it does better with, the advance coming later in the cycle.
Yeah, just kind of look at what your cam is too. I mean, if you're running, where's your power curve with horsepower and what's your intake? If you're running, let's say you're running a big high lev cam and you got a higher intake, well, your horsepower range is going to be up, and so you want more advance on your upper end. As far as it's gonna. You don't want it early, because then you're just too far advanced early,
and then you got nothing once you get up there.
Right. So you want it more towards your horsepower, your higher horsepower areas where your full advance is. But I mean, what's my Chevelle running?
Yeah, and unless you're gonna, I don't know. It's been all over the board.
It's been all over the board.
And it's the kind of, this is the one of the areas where like a dyno tuner, really a good dyno guy can really help you a lot. They can give you, your air fuel ratios across the spectrum, and they can recommend whether it needs more carb, more jet or less jet, or more timing or less timing.
Stall converter, rear end gear.
I can't say enough for the benefits of a good dyno tune. Right. If you're concerned with getting more power, you invested in a big cam. You spending some time on the dyno, even if you just, get 2-3 hours on a dyno somewhere, chassis dyno, they can, you can, and then go to the shop prepared to make changes quickly. Most chassis dynos around here, you're renting time, not necessarily a number of poles. I know if you go to your state fairgrounds or whatever, the big car shows, you pay by the pole. But that's not chassis tuning. They're not been doing any tuning. That's all just show and go kind of stuff. But it would be advantageous to, if you're going to get a half a day of dyno tuning in, and find out what your numbers are, and then you can test changing out the jets in your carb, or you can test changing the RPM curve on your. Then you're tuning it for your specific setup, as opposed to just taking a guess what the best, what's best for your car.
I agree. I mean, it's just one of those things where you got to have all those things. As far as your horsepower and your power, where your power range for your cam is, and your gearing and stall converter or whatever. It all has to play into that. So,
yep.
You're better off just putting it on a dyno. Have somebody help you out and tune it.
Yep, and a good dyno guy, he can look at the numbers and make solid recommendations across the board.
Well, that's a whole lot of feedback there.
You didn't have to do that.
I don't think you helped them out much at all.
But that's so hard to say.
It's so vague.
It's just.
I think that there's probably a general area where any particular engine likes to run at for a max advance or timing. Maybe figure out what that is and work your way backwards. Know what your mechanical advance is, and subtract that, and you kind of know where your initial is, kind of thing.
Well, they'll tune it later. They'll all have, usually when you're adjusting the curve, it's how quickly it reaches max, or how slowly it reaches max.
Sure.
But yeah.
Yep.
There's so many variances, as far as variables go.
All right. Enough said.
Yeah. Enough said.
Let's see. Manny says, when your fuel cost is more than your mortgage, you have a problem. I simply can't afford to fuel my 5.7 or 7.5 liter beast anymore. I have had to trade my big blocks in for small blocks.
No.
5 miles a gallon just doesn't cut it anymore. Shame. Shame.
You got to go to E85.
Yeah, that's what Ross did.
You save a lot of money.
He still gets 5 miles a gallon,
Yeah,
but now he's only paying $3.50
Yeah.
a gallon, and
And I don't have to buy racing gas.
and you don't have to buy racing gas because
Which costs
you
me
can
a
run
lot.
14-to-1 compression without any issues.
It's the easiest way to go.
Yes, Ross has become a big fan of the 85.
Yeah, don't trade your big blocks in.
His big block is running on the 85. Yeah, we kicked around that one for a while. He wanted more horsepower, but he didn't want to spend money on racing fuel. So then we went to E85 with him.
Doesn't really make much difference if you don't keep any in the tank.
Be quiet.
Sorry. I'm just saying, I just heard that. That's all.
Yeah, maybe that doesn't work. Right?
And fortunately, you guys have all tuned in for Terry's last show.
What? You're bashing me because I wasn't here. I wasn't here. That's what
Just
happened.
kidding. Okay,
Defend
Ross
myself.
had an episode where he ran out of gas attending a car show recently. Apparently, his gas gauge stuck, and
I thought I had plenty of gas.
and so now the crew of us will relentlessly remind him of it until.
I'm just going back to going by my mileage. No gas gauge.
Yeah.
I was used to
What's
not
that?
having
80
one.
miles a tank?
Yeah.
About that?
How about that?
Come on, it's 16 gallon.
It's miles per gallon. It's not miles per gallon. It's miles per gallon.
There we go. All right. Sorry, guys, you had to listen to that. All right, Austin asks, how true it is to be, wait, we'll go back to Manny. We understand, fuel costs are high on everybody, but, you spent a ton of money on your car, unless you're using your daily driver or you're using your show car as a daily driver. I would just, fuel prices go up, fuel prices go down. Eventually, it will all correct itself again for a while, and I'm not going to say it won't be back up high again ever, but for those of us who've seen it go high and low all the time, changing your car based on the current fuel, or changing your engine or your car based on the current fuel situation is probably like
That's
short-term thinking. Because having bought 6-cylinder cars before and then had the price of fuel go down and then hated the fact that I had a 6-cylinder car.
Yeah.
And having been through this before, I can say, if it's your hobby car, you just enjoy it. Maybe you enjoy it closer to home for a while to save some money. But eventually, all things will change.
Yeah.
All right, Austin asks, how true it is that into the 70s, it was somewhat popular in the U.S. to dispose of cars by dumping them into the woods because proper disposal of a scrapyard used to cost money. I never knew a salvage yard that would charge you to take your car.
You usually got paid for them to come take it. $75, come haul it away, and they come pick it up.
They pay you.
They pay you. Yeah. That was usually the case. I don't know where you live, Austin, but I've never seen a case where somebody charged me to take a car. And usually when it came time to get rid of a car, I also managed to get rid of a bunch of old tires in the trunk and maybe a couple of old batteries and a few
They
other
like
things.
batteries.
Yeah.
Nowadays they like batteries, but maybe not back then.
you know, and then anything else. Maybe if you had, you know, I can remember when I remodeled a bathroom, the sink went in a car that went to the salvage yard. So, so yeah, you know, if you really think about it, you know, you could make getting rid of a car, you know, sort of a cost beneficial thing by getting rid of everything else that you don't want to get rid of.
Yep.
I think there was a lot of farm studs. If you live on a farm, any equipment or cars just kind of went out in the back for you.
Yeah.
Got
Well, I
parked.
think yeah, I think back then, you know, it was you know usually the farm cars, you know, yeah, on the farm everything got pushed to the back 40 and then sat out there until it slowly entered the ground. But a lot of times, you know, the farmer mentality was always, well, don't just throw, you know,
Yeah,
don't
don't
get
waste
rid of the
anything.
car. It might be able to use parts, and then you look at the hay wagon, and it's got, you know, 12-bolt rear axle on it, and then you and stuff like that. So it's not uncommon for you know the farmers to you know look at things like old cars and say I can get parts off of it for the next car or for some farm equipment or whatever.
Yeah.
The let's see, Michael Wright. I am confused about the best treatment. My 27T body.
My rusted ones.
Rust converters, rust inhibitors. I plan on blasting it, but with what media? um,
Body guy.
yeah. Well, yeah. Well, let's start with Terry. He's got a 27T, and he's confused over. Yeah, yeah. I'll bet if it's a 27T, there's some surfaced rust here and there on it, or maybe in some cases, I've seen them completely covered with surface rust.
You'd say my rusted 2017.
Yep.
Well, I would be really careful going after
Yeah.
with.
Yeah.
You can media blast. Just use something softer. I'd say you can use soda blast. You can use crushed walnut shells. You can use plastic beads. Something soft that's not going to heat up the metal and peen the metal and warp it.
Take everything away.
Yeah. I think soda blast. You can do the water hydroblasting. I think that's crushed glass and water, and that does work. But it does work really good for cleaning metal, for sure. Um, soda man it does a good job of removing finishes, but maybe not so much scale. But so you might have to go a little heavier with the media for that. But yeah, if you're going to blast it, that's fine. You could dip it, but that's expensive and not easy to do.
Well, there's a couple. Well, there's acid dipping, which is I don't recommend just because it does get rid of the rust, and there's still places that do it, but I don't recommend it because there's a process of acid. The process of removing rust from metal with acid also creates what they call a hydrogen embrittlement, which makes the metal really fragile almost. It hardens the metal to make it more susceptible to fracturing. There's another process, a dipping process, where it's basically put in soda water and they give it an electrical charge. And then they reverse the charge and it causes the rust to essentially flake off the car. Um, there used to be for a while there was a lot of companies that offered that process, but now I'm in we're in a fairly there used to be a couple places here in Minnesota that did it. Now I'm not aware of anybody that's actually using that technique right now. The last place I know, he kind of folded folded up his business and moved it down to Iowa, and then I think he went bankrupt down there. So um, there are ways of removing rust other than blasting. Um, and when it comes to blasting itself, yeah, usually the heat is your biggest culprit because you're hitting it with something. You're hitting it with an abrasive. Whenever you're hitting something with an abrasive, it starts developing heat. When they develop heat on a sheet metal, you got to worry about warping. which is why the hydroblast or the soda blasting is real popular because there's a lot of water involved. Although I do know guys that do regular media blast, they'll use like on my '57 DeSoto, the entire body was blasted on that car. Uh, but it was a guy that had been blasting cars for decades, and he knew how to blast a car without warping metal. Um, so it can be done. You really want to make this is a place where if you're going to have somebody dry blast your car, you really want to make sure it's somebody that knows what they're doing with sheet metal. Um, because a bad blaster can make a lot of work for you down the road trying to straighten out panels.
It's ugly. I've seen perfectly straight cars go to the blaster and come back looking like a sack of potatoes.
Yep. Yeah, and exactly. And I don't, you like I say, it's one of those cases where you don't want. That's one place you don't shop for price.
Right.
And you look for somebody with a reputation for doing good work. And a lot of shops, if it's all over, and and I've seen a lot of the 27 or the T's where the whole thing is as a patina of surface rust. As far as using the rust converters, it would do the job. But I don't seriously recommend it. I think your best solution is to get rid of it. Although I know some guys, if it's depending on if you're looking to restore the car 100% back to original and be bone stock and last for decades, yeah, you're best to get rid of the rust. If it's more of a rat rod hobby car, just something that you don't want to invest tons of money into, the rust converters will work. I've used them before. I've used them primarily on underbodies and chassis where, the whole underside of the car is covered with rust. I don't want to, paint and blast it all off, so I can, go in and I spray it with a rust converter. And actually, I've had good success with it lasting for years and years without any issues. Again, it all comes down to prep. You still got to get rid of any loose or flaky rust. You got to get rid of any dirt or grease or anything like that. You still got to prep it before you put the rust converter stuff on it. Will it work? Yeah, it worked. I've even primed it and scuffed it, primed it, and top coated it with regular paint without issue. Again, it depends what you're using. What your plans are for the car, how much you want to invest into doing it. And rust converters aren't cheap. It'll probably cost you as much for rust converters as it will to have a body shop soda blast your car. Let's see. I can't add photo to this message board, or do you know how? I don't think you can literally. Did we do that? Somebody added that last time? I'm not sure. I don't think so offhand. I think last time somebody gave us a link to like a photo bucket kind of site or a photo sharing site that we could see the photo. I'm not aware of on the chat roll to actually embed a photo or upload a photo. Lord knows, Lord knows if we allowed that, what some people might upload. Sam asks, I can't seem to solve this problem. This is a perfect one for Terry then.
Oh, great.
This mainly happens after driving on a hot day. Mainly when parking on asphalt or somewhere that traps a lot of heat. I'll go to start the car after running into the store or pumping it full of gas, and the starter clicks but doesn't turn over. The car has power for everything else. The car is a 1968 Pontiac Catalina with a 400 engine. Well, there's
Ooh.
your problem. That's a lousy engine, and then the it's
It's
a
not very nice.
well, I jest. Terry on the other end here has a 400 Pontiac in a 68.
Yeah, it's a hot days this last weekend. Didn't want to crank very well either.
I
It get a
would-
little hot and
I would say either, if it's
Starter.
clicking, I would say it's either starter or solenoid.
My first thought would be heat sink
Mhm.
into the starter itself.
Because we had a Camaro you were there this last weekend. He pulled up in our spots, the street machines, and he says his car, because we asked him politely to move, and he says his IROC won't start until it cools off, and it was just clicking.
Is that right?
Yeah, and I said, well, you either got a bad sound. He says, yeah, once it cools off, starts right up. Not like it was, timing issue or
Yep.
heating issue. The starter was just clicking like it wasn't either. The starter wasn't, usually when the solenoid is clicking, it's making contact with the starter. So I don't know if it was just, I would say either starter or depending on how old it is, but
yeah, and they know there was an issue with that because they actually put heat shields on those solenoids, and I know other manufacturers did too, but they actually had them for that model.
Yep.
They're right up against the exhaust manifolds
And actually, if you go to like Jigs and Summits, and I know especially for like small block Chevys and stuff, and maybe there's something on the Pontiac side too. There's like additional heat shields that are available that will basically give your starter more shielding from the heat. Yeah, when you stop it, then your engine's hot, your exhaust hot, everything's hot, and it's going to naturally radiate to the starter.
Yeah.
The other things, the other things that come to mind is anything that's going to shield that area. If you're allowed to, you could always use like heat wrap on your exhaust pipe just in that section where it comes off the manifold and before it gets to where it goes near the starter. That would isolate, because that stuff works really well. You see it on race cars a lot where they wrap all the headers with that, and it works really good. You wouldn't need to buy a full, enough to do a full set of headers, but you could get enough to just wrap that section of pipe, exhaust pipe there, and that might give you some added protection, keep the heat away from your starter. Anything that's going to keep the heat away from your starter, because your starter is what's absorbing all that heat.
or
Go ahead.
if the starter's bad and you're not one of these guys that has to have a factory Pontiac starter, the gear reduction starters are much smaller and much better starters,
They are, yeah.
and you won't have that problem.
or if it's an old starter solenoid, get a new one.
Or if
Right.
if it's an old starter,
But it's closer to that.
sometimes they're more prone to that if they're older starters.
Right.
Yeah.
Because the bushings are starting to get worn and everything else, and I have found that sometimes just replacing the starter solves the problem because all new bushings and all new parts. Sometimes gear reduction starter. I know on the 57. That was sometimes a little finicky, and I did go to a gear reduction starter on that.
Yep.
The starter went from being this big to being this big and lifted with one hand,
Much further away from the exhaust.
and much further away from the more room around it, and it doesn't seem to have anywhere near as much heat. It doesn't have any heat
Right.
start issues anymore, but it's not uncommon for old cars
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
But there are some things you can do, and I would, I'd try those. Either replace the starter, or try to isolate your starter from the heat.
It's really tough with a stock starter on those. They're tucked right up there against
Tight.
the block.
Are
of the
they?
manifold.
Is it really
It's
limited
tight.
space?
It's very
Stock
tight.
manifolds are very tight on Pontiacs.
Yeah, they are. And I don't know. I guess if it's old, I'd probably maybe replace solenoid at least, start there, and then maybe the starter if they're both old. But or if you have something else, another one later on, you can swap it out with and try it. But,
Yeah.
but that's usually what it is.
Yeah.
You can fix that. It's not uncommon, that's for sure.
Nope.
Okay, Pete writes, what kind of adhesive would you recommend for vinyl upholstery being used on door panels? I've tried. There's a couple of different kinds of contact adhesive for upholstery. One stays softer. It works good for foam and stuff, where it doesn't get hard and it'll adhere, but it doesn't get rock hard. For on door panels, I usually go with a full, contact cement, where you're brushing it on both sides, slapping it together, especially on vinyl, because then I don't have any issues. Usually, when I try to get clever with it, that's when I start having issues with it. I used some fancy glues or the kick panels on vinyl on the 57, and it looked beautiful. Everything snapped in, everything, and then after a year, they started to peel loose. So I had to pull them all out of the car, and then basically what the glue I had on there, which was the soft kind of like foam contact adhesives, that just it wasn't holding up, and it wasn't standing the test of time. So I went to like a hardware store contact cement kind of thing, and I just brushed it on the back of the board, slapped it together, and never had an issue since. uh, did the same thing on some of the places on our um, door panels too. Although the door panels, those were also mechanically attached. Some places on our door panels, we actually ran through the sewing machine and then folded the vinyl over. Other places, we actually rolled the vinyl to the backside and used a short, like 1/8 inch staples, and actually stapled the vinyl all the way around on the backside. So it wasn't just a glue. We also used a mechanical fastener as well, and haven't had any issues at all with those.
I like the 3M Super Trim adhesive, the aerosol.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a nice tip on there. Puts a nice pattern out that's kind of stringy, and both surfaces. It is contact cement.
It is, yeah. It's
And
3M's contact cement.
It works great. Yeah. I like that. I use that all the time. But then anyway, I got to glue anything. I like it. I like it a lot. But
Cool.
yeah, put my vinyl top on with that.
Yeah, there's also if you're going to do a lot of contact cement, there's a I think it's a depth product that's called trim and vinyl top adhesive,
Probably the same thing.
and that stuff works amazing. It's like that. If once you put it on both sides, attach it together, it's like then you need an army
Good
of
luck
guys
getting it
to
off.
separate
It better
it.
be where you want it.
You make sure you get it in the right place the first time, because it's odd, which is probably good for vinyl top. Let's see. Jason P asks, just got a 1959 Ford Fairlane 500 Galaxy Skyliner. Wow. Only problem is the retractable hardtop needs some skilled hands. Any tips for a stuck top? Huh. There is
Take them apart.
it's a neat car. There's like 20 some different solenoids that all kick in to make the top run. Uh, have I ever tried one? I've never had the luxury of having to try to service them. I know there are guys that are skilled on the retractable hardtop. I'm not one of them. and I would think you'd have to find somebody that had some background and some firsthand knowledge with those.
Or how long's it been sitting? Maybe you just start taking things apart and spraying them down.
You could try the basic, test your solenoids, clean all your connections, clean all the joints, all the articulating joints, make sure everything's moving free and everything else. Do the common sense kind of things.
Yeah.
But
I don't know enough about those to
I
have
like
a good
them.
answer.
I mean,
But
it's a cool
could
thing,
they be
but, yeah.
manually operated? I mean, could you override the solenoids?
I don't know.
I don't either.
I don't know. Maybe somebody listening out there has some knowledge working on retractable hardtop. It's not me. Unfortunately, I haven't, I've worked on a lot of different cars, but I've never had the luxury of working on that one.
There's a few around. Maybe you could talk to somebody at car shows again.
And if anybody knows anybody has a recommendation on somebody, go ahead and enter it in the chat roll here. If you, or even if you have a recommendation of somebody, Jason can contact, or to get some firsthand information, go ahead and share that too. I know those people are out there. There's still guys working on those today. I know cars that I know new retractables being built yet today. So I know the people have to be out there that can help you out with that, Jason. Kyle asks, should I buy a vintage car for my first car? I'm 16 and I don't need to drive much. I really love Lincolns and Chryslers from the 70s, especially Lincoln's using the Thunderbird body, which I think would hopefully make it more practical. Well, let's see, from the 70s, Lincoln's using the Thunderbird body would be the Marks, weren't they? Like the Mark V, wasn't that using some of the big Thunderbird body?
I think so.
Thunderbird's real. Oh, yeah.
Let's see.
In the 70s again.
I think I would hopefully make it more practical to find parts. I didn't know about that. Would small fixes and cosmetics be too difficult for my first car? I grew up on a farm too. Well, that helps. So you're used to fixing stuff.
Yeah.
Can you, a 70s car, is relatively low in electronics. And if you want a car that you're going to work on yourself, 70s car might be a good choice. There's not a lot of electronics involved, unless you buy a Lincoln or a Chrysler.
I say do it. And if you're a tinkerer, you're going to learn as you go. Just do it. Do it.
But at 16,
fix what you need.
At 16,
I think I'd buy a transportation car first and then look.
No. When you're forced to fix something you're driving, you tend to fix it. You get in the key, get in the car, turn the key, and drive it around. What are you learning?
When you were 16, did you want to?
I had to fix everything that I had. Yeah. Otherwise, I walked.
Yeah, and he was driving a 70s car.
I was driving a 67 Chevelle, but I got it when I was 15, so I was ready to drive when I was 16. So.
Yeah.
So what are you saying?
Yeah, but
I'm just saying. I like
we've
to
seen
drive.
you drive.
I don't know.
I like to go places.
I would say go for it.
Oh yeah.
Okay, Terry says go for it.
I would. I'd go get what you want.
Would you tell me to get a Lincoln or a Chrysler, or maybe just a?
I guess it
Thunderbird?
depends on the car.
Yeah.
What kind of shape it is and kind of working.
My only issue would be, at that age, it's the electronics more than anything else that's going to give you trouble. There's not a lot of electronics in those cars, but it's things like power window motors and power window switches and door seat tracks and all the
luxury stuff.
All the luxury electronics are, also tend to fatigue over time.
My first car had power windows and they didn't work. But But I found out soon that the wires going to the door and the
Clean
door
'em.
jam they just broke off from opening and
Yeah.
closing the door so much, and they just splice them back together and they work. I don't know. It's just you're gonna run into that no matter what you get. But
If you love cars, I mean, I think it'd be fun.
yeah, you figure
especially
it
at
out.
16.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'd say go for it.
All
For it.
right,
And then call Ross if you have a problem.
we'll be posting Ross's phone number at the end of this.
I don't know who had more electrical problems with, but I would say Ford's had more problems with electrical than Chrysler's did. I know my T-Bird, I had a 69 Suicide, and none of the windows worked in that car. And I literally had to take all the switches out and clean them, but the motors were all good. But it's always electronic contacts and boards that always have issues with.
Yeah, if I was going to buy one of, and I'm sure I'm going to catch a lot of heat real quick here. So guys, don't hate on me, all right? It's just my opinion. Okay, if my choices are between a 70s Lincoln or a 70s Chrysler, I'm going to buy the Lincoln. Not because I'm a big Ford Lincoln Mercury fan. It's because it's a 1970s car, and at that point, unless I'm buying a really painfully clean one, and most 16-year-olds aren't going to afford that, Chrysler is a unibody car, and the Chryslers, even the big old Newport and everything else, they have issues with that unibody structure, kind of fatiguing and rusting and everything else over the time. But your Lincoln will still be a full frame in the 1970s, being a less prone to rust failure kind of issues of the Chryslers. That's just my opinion.
I thought the big Chryslers they used for demo derbies because they had a truck frame.
Not in the 70s.
69s and stuff?
66 was the last year for a Chrysler with that was the Imperial that had
That's
a full
what I was
frame.
thinking, the old Imperials.
The
old ones had a full frame.
Yeah, and I had a demo derby to 70 Chrysler Newport, and I can tell you right now, poor choice for a demo derby.
It's a little rusted. Yeah, folded up on you.
That poor car just buckled in half. It was like suddenly the steering wheel just spun around because it had buckled so far that the steering shaft came out of the box, and it was like, okay, so I guess we're not going anywhere. But that's, all right. Now, all my Chrysler friends don't get upset. I'm just saying, this is a car that a 16-year-old is going to buy, kind of like the Thunderbird bodied Lincolns, which would be the Mark Vs. And you can probably get one of those still affordable.
Yeah.
Maybe not a rust-free, clean example would be affordable, but you probably could find a decent car that was still affordable.
They still had big motors in them.
Yeah.
Even at mid 70s had 77s had 460s in them.
Yep.
So,
all the motor you need to
just,
spend $5 a gallon.
I had a 77 Lincoln Mark 4 or something, Mark 5. It was a big old car, but it was fun.
That's the fun of it, is when you can have a big old car that's still fun. Yeah. All right, I have the first question in that this is a question that I'm going to propose it to you guys because I've answered this one so many times, and it usually comes in many forms. But I'm going to read it off as I received it. I would like to know what years are considered classic cars. And usually I get this question in the form of either this, something real generic, what years, or is my fill in the blank considered a classic car? Is my 2012, 2000, is my 2020, no, let's see, not that usually. It's usually like, what is my 2002 Firebird? Is that a classic car? And
not yet.
Some people will say yes, not yet. Some people will say, there's a difference between collectible or classic. Is it a classic? Is it collectible? I don't know. I tend to think, some cars, I tend to think, I'll take a broader approach. I think some cars are like instant classic. I think they're classic cars from the day they were built. I think like like a Ford GT40 or Ford
No,
GT,
yeah.
is a classic car from the day it was built. You can turn around and sell it, when you're allowed to sell it a year later or whatever, for more than you paid for it. That is, to me, that's a sign of a collectible classic car, is when it's, the value of it increases. The but
I almost
I
say,
like I say, I take a broader approach. Do I think that like any Firebird Trans Am or is a collectible? I think so. I think it's a collectible car. I think it's a classic car. I'm sure there are those that will take the long approach. Is a new Challenger a classic car? I don't think so.
no. I mean,
Are they fun current performance sports cars? Yes, they are.
I think it still goes back to, how old is it too? I mean, it's, yeah, like you said, those GT40s and stuff like that. Well, of course they're, you know, but things
150
like,
years
yeah, I mean,
I think it's
something,
relative to how old we are. Because if you're 20 and you got a 20-year-old car, that's an old car.
well, that's
But if
true.
you're 60, and you got a 20-year-old car, you're thinking about cars when you're teenagers, and those are classics just because of time. But I don't know when can we get a collector plate here in Minnesota? Is it 20 years
20 years.
old?
20 years.
Does that mean it's a collector car? I don't know.
It doesn't mean it's a classic car, but
Yeah.
it means it's a collector
It's
car.
collector, yeah. So a classic car, yeah, maybe it's in the eye of the beholder.
I would
You know?
say, yeah, I think it's what you think. I mean,
For
I've
me, it's
seen
got to be
cars
something
that-
that's old.
something that you like.
That's
Yeah,
me.
it's got to be old. It's got to be beyond, to me, it's 20, 25-year-old car.
And it's something I think that you can't just go and buy. With it, you have an unlimited amount of money and just go buy it. I think it's got to be a little harder to come across or come and get one. It's something that's not made anymore. That's just in my mind. You can.
Yeah.
There's plenty of cars that are built that way, that are collectible right off the bat.
Oh, we forgot to shut the air compressor
Maybe
off.
that's a sign for me to shut up.
Should I go shut it
I
off?
don't know. Yeah, go shut it off.
Or no, it'll shut itself off. We're going to have a brief interlude here while the air compressor we forgot to shut off before this.
I think it's still in the eye of the beholder.
I think it is. Yeah.
I tend to, like I say, I tend to take a very broad look at what's a classic car. And to me, I think some cars that are even newer, that are unique, can be a classic car.
Yeah.
I think for the most part, I kind of like, the Minnesota here is 20 years old. 20 years old before you can get collector's plate. Do I think that's a accurate number? No, because I still plow my driveway with a 20-year-old truck, and
You should
I'm not about to put collector's plates on it either.
save money.
The what?
You got so many cars, you might as well just save money because you don't have to buy plates that
Yeah, one-time plate fee.
way. Yeah.
Yeah.
It still
But by
costs
the
you
time
50, 60 bucks a year for a plate nowadays.
The way that plow truck's going, it'll be nothing left of it by the time that plate is paid for.
I don't think it's good to make fun of my vehicles.
I gotta go.
Hey, it plows. It plows though. See, that's the good thing about it.
Yeah. So, what is a classic car? I don't know. I think it's as far as the club itself, we'll recognize just about anything anybody wants to ask a question about, or if it's a car that if it was your grandfather's car and it was a 2005 Impala, we'll embrace it. We'll say, sure. If it's a classic car to you,
Got some
you can
history.
you can use the same principles to do body paint, upholstery that you use on your 2005 that the guy building his 32 Ford is going to use, because a lot of the same techniques and processes apply to a wide range of years. And the number one thing most of us are going to do is body and paint stuff. Your newer cars aren't going to have the same issues with brakes and a lot of the safety stuff, because that stuff has been worked out over the years. So, and
Parts
Yeah.
are available.
Yeah, the parts are, yeah, you can go to the dealer and get parts. Yeah, you know, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I tend to think that it covers a very wide swath in determining which cars are classic. I know, like the Classic Car Club of America, they have very strict guidelines on what cars they consider classics. And it goes down to year, make, models of very specific cars that they consider classics. And most of those are like milestone cars or iconic cars. Or I tend to think that that's a very restrictive and very sort of aloof kind of approach to it. I don't think classic cars have to be Duesenbergs or Auburns or something so rare that most people may never see one in their life. But I don't know. To me, it's like whatever works for you. If you think your car is a classic and it's old and you've enjoyed it and you've got blood, sweat, and tears into it, sure, it's a
More
classic.
power to you. Yeah.
All right. With that, we're at the top of the hour, guys. I want to appreciate everyone for coming out and participating tonight. Once again, you made it like spending an hour with you guys went real quick. A lot of great questions tonight. And with that, we'll see you in a month. We'll be back here again third Wednesday of the month, and we'll see you then.